Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is July 22nd, 2019. It was another open Q&A this week, so we will just go ahead and get right into it. All right. What are some scenarios or things you personally like to see checked before considering someone going on birth control? Length of use, age, etc. Well, first off, there's a lot of reasons that someone would want to go on birth control, and you always have to remember as a coach too, you're not a doctor, so make sure that you are giving proper suggestions and feedback. But I would probably ask them, what is the reasoning for going on birth control? What is the reasoning that your doctor may want to prescribe you birth control? A lot of times there are hormonal issues, like they have irregularities in their menstrual cycle, and they will give them birth control to try to stop it or balance it, or what have you. But and a lot of the time that's without even seeing any type of initial lab work, where that is troubling. We definitely do want to see if they are being prescribed some type of birth control, and there are a lot of different types, hormonal birth control. We would want to see initially a pretty comprehensive hormone profile at least, and see like where are the gaps, why are they having these irregularities, is it maybe something lifestyle related too, before just throwing them on a synthetic hormone. Maybe we can address the issue via over-the-counter supplementation or something lifestyle related, or maybe they need some type of other hormone replacement therapy. So knowing why is obviously, that's going to be the biggest thing. That's going to be the most important thing, as there are a lot of different menstrual cycle irregularities that could potentially benefit from birth control, and other female specific disorders that could benefit. Now, if they are just wanting to get the contraceptive benefit, okay, that's great. There are non-hormonal options specifically for females. Like I have quite a few clients that use the copper IUD, so that's an option. It's non-hormonal. It is long-term. It's easy to use because it's implanted. So, that's a good option for a lot of people. That would potentially be something to consider. There are downsides to every type. There are potential downsides to the copper IUD, like heavier cycles, but at the same time, you're also not introducing a synthetic hormone into your system for really long periods of time that you just don't need. That could come with potential downsides as well. So, you may argue that the non-hormonal option could be better. But yeah, you say personally, what do I like to see checked? I just want to know why. I want to know why they want the birth control, or why the doctor's prescribing it. Maybe there's something I can do on my end. Maybe there's not. But I at least like to be in the loop, and if it is for contraceptive purposes, then maybe just suggest, hey, there's non-hormonal options. Talk about that. Maybe talk to your doctor about it. Why? That's the biggest thing for sure. And then if there's any type of hormonal testing we need to see, something like the Dutch test can show us everything right off the rip. We can just see it all. That'd be awesome. And then obviously you could do it through blood work as well. All right, what are your thoughts on cycling HCG short 2 to 4 week bouts versus HCG throughout TRT versus only using HCG when trying for children? Goal is to preserve fertility in a young TRT user, and secondary consideration to increase libido, especially when in a prolonged deficit. Well, first off, with the libido, I've heard mixed things. A lot of people don't notice anything. HCG will potentially increase estrogen levels, which I assume that's why people are getting the libido boost, is from increased estrogen. Could be wrong. That's just been my assumption. Some people report just better well-being. Again, it could just be estrogen related. It's hard to say. But in terms of fertility, you're going to see, I'm not a fertility doctor. I'm not an expert on this, but I've definitely, obviously in this field, like I've seen it countless times. And just from my experience, it seems that most people will benefit primarily just from using it when they need it. So when they want to conceive, if they cannot conceive without the HCG, then they can introduce it. And in most cases, people will benefit from using HCG and HMG simultaneously. That seems to be the kicker there, is using those two together. It seems to be a very potent fertility protocol, because we want to get luteinizing hormone work, and we want to get sperm production and all that jazz. So but that's not to say there's plenty of people that conceive without anything, that have been using TRT or extra exogenous hormones on their own for long periods of time and conceive just fine. So first off, just try. And then secondly, you could go to a fertility protocol like that. I don't know that running it continuously, whether it be in short bouts or throughout, is going to provide a lot of benefit versus running it just when the time comes to do the deed, if you will. So that's kind of my take on it. And that seems to be the consensus. And I've heard that from a few different doctors and a couple of people that I trust. So that's where my opinion lies typically. All right. Let's see here. Any experience or studies with prescription medications to lower blood pressure, like telmisartan, incorporating it to a high normal blood pressure, example 130/70, would it be okay or not advisable to use? Well, depending on what recommendations you're looking at, you're going to probably see 120 to 140 for systolic and around 80 for diastolic is top end of the range, depending on which recommendations you're looking at. So 130/70 is maybe slightly systolic hypertensive, but I mean, it's slightly. That's not to say that you shouldn't pay attention to it, but does that warrant a medication? Maybe not. I would just definitely make sure that you're exhausting all other options and that you're making sure everything nutritionally is there. Everything in terms of electrolyte balance is there. Kidney function is good. You are also not using too many stimulants. You're not too stressed. Your sleep is good. All that stuff, because any of those stressors are going to raise blood pressure. Also, make sure that you're checking blood pressure at multiple times per day, because it does vary. So if you're kind of in that range, try, if you want to check a couple times a week or a few times a week, check at different times a day to get an average and see where you're at, because there's just a lot of things that can temporarily raise it. But make sure you're exhausting everything before you go on a medication. Now, with that said, the telmisartan is an ARB, or ARB, and those tend to be pretty well tolerated. And I've heard several more progressive practitioners talk about using ARBs, and there's pretty good research on them. They have some other secondary cardiovascular benefits as well. So if you're going to go that route, the ARBs are probably one of your better options. Of course, talk to your doctor about it, but that seems to be one of the better class of BP medications. And like I said, there's also some secondary benefits. So, there's these newer generation ARBs are pretty good, it seems. So that would potentially be a good option if you do need to go that route. All right, if goal is to hover at maintenance calories or retain weight within 3 pounds either direction, what's your take on tracking protein only and otherwise eating based on satiety and fullness signals while letting fats and carbohydrates fall where they will? Well, I assume when they say letting fats and carbohydrates fall where they will, they mean within that calorie range. So if they need 3,000 calories, then just hitting the protein and filling in the rest with whatever. Yeah, yeah, most likely you're gonna stay within 3 pounds up or down. Yep, unless there is some environmental factor that changes drastically, then you're probably gonna hang out right there and hit protein accordingly. You're not going to lose muscle mass or anything like that. It's going to be enough protein for muscle protein synthesis, support recovery and training and all that stuff. So, but assuming that like your daily activity, your NEAT levels aren't changing drastically, you're training or you're not taking in or pulling out cardio or things. So if all that stuff, if calories in, calories out, maintain, and you don't have any outside factors changing, and you don't have any internal factors changing like you do hormonally, you got something wacky going on, then yeah, you could do that. You're gonna probably stay right within that range for sure. It would work. All right. When to know to increase calories during a bulk if scale weight isn't moving up, but gym progression is still going up. Excuse me. Increase in weight in the 18 to 15 rep range, so you know it's not just improvement in neuroadaptation. Well, if your goal is to bulk, then you're going to need to see some scale weight progression. Yes, the gym progression is good. Visually, you need to see, visually, obviously not. It's so hard visually, though. It's such a slow process visually. You can look at side-by-sides of comparisons from weeks and weeks and go or months, and you're going to see more. But the scale... I'm going to say that the scale is a decent tool here, assuming that everything's pretty stable. You're not introducing something different hormonally or jacking up, carbohydrates or something really high. We're going to pull a bunch more water in. So assuming nothing's changing drastically, yeah, you're probably going to want to see some scale progression. Now, how fast you go really depends on what you're seeing visually. Always talk about, I've talked about this many times, talking about the beneficial ratio of fat to muscle gain. If you gain 5 pounds, what does that 5 pounds look like? Do you look like you've gained a bunch of fat, or do you look relatively close to the same in terms of body fat? If you do, then that's probably a beneficial ratio of muscle to fat gain, or lean body mass to fat gain. So you can just keep going. But if you're seeing no scale progression for extended periods, then you're probably not gaining much weight or much muscle, even though you're progressing in the gym. Now, with that said, you don't have to have linear scale progression. You don't have to go up all the time, especially if you're really far away from your normal set point. The scale progression is probably going to slow down. At that point, you probably see a little bit less. As time goes on, you want to slow down, because it's not glycogen, it's not water, it's not any of those things at that point. So you'll want to probably slow it down. You can even do holding phases where if you weigh 220 pounds and you've never weighed 220 pounds before, it's your biggest bulk or your biggest growth phase, and you're getting further and further away from that set point, hold that 220 for a few weeks. Don't be afraid to do that. And let your body regain homeostasis, let your digestion improve, let all those things improve at this new body fat, body weight set point, and then resume growth, gain a little bit more, hold, gain a little bit more, hold. So you can do it like that as well. So holding phases are fine. It's just if you're never seeing scale progression for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, then you're probably not gaining much muscle, most likely. Okay. I think that's it. Let me check. Maybe one more. Oh, I lied. There's one more. All right. Thoughts on keto? Thoughts on a keto diet with Lantus after a contest diet in order to gain lean Macros would be 350 to 400 protein, and the rest fat at above maintenance calories. Drugs only TRT. Options, I'm guessing these are what he's considering. Everyday Lantus or only on training days, and the rest metformin to keep sensitivity high. How much and when to carb up, and how much? Okay, couple things. You're not in ketosis with 400 grams of protein, most likely. That's not a keto diet. You're just doing a high protein, high fat diet. Secondly, if it's after a contest, you should be the most insulin sensitive that you've been at any point, pretty much. You know, in your leanest, calories have been low, you're been depleted, whatever. So you should be very insulin sensitive. I don't see why you would want to use a keto diet at this point. I would want the carbohydrates at this point. This is a time that you would take advantage of them. Even in somebody that typically doesn't metabolize them that well or never gets really very high carb, per se, this would be the time that they could use some carbohydrates pretty effectively because your partitioning is so good. So you could still use the Lantus and metformin, but Lantus and metformin aren't the same mechanistically, so they don't have to be alternated. You could really use the Lantus in any day that you need to control blood glucose. So if you're just using carbohydrates heavier on training days, then obviously you're going to need it more then. But if you notice that blood glucose is elevated slightly on training days, it could still be used on those days. Metformin could be used every day, really. I mean, it's just mainly lowering hepatic glucose output. So it's not like you have to alternate the two, or you can't use them simultaneously. The metformin's not really going to acutely lower blood glucose. You don't take it and then have lower blood glucose right away. That's not really how it works. And then it's also not a shuttling agent. It's like insulin or like Lantus. So I just don't know that I would use the keto diet in that case. But if you really wanted to, sure. I mean, you could use Lantus with the keto diet, but do you need to? Do you really need that? Or is your blood sugar even elevated? I mean, is it controlled, or do you actually need it? I've talked about how ketogenic diets can also cause insulin resistance. But again, I don't think most people, outside of someone that's maybe just very stressed or has very poor digestive health, if those things are good, then you shouldn't be insulin resistant or really need insulin at that point. And if you do, if you're using carbohydrates, maybe, slowly introduce the insulin. But again, I'm not sure that I would even use those. But I gave you a couple situations or a couple instances where you could use them, and you do not have to alternate the metformin with the Lantus. It's not necessary. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, but I feel like maybe the basis of the plan in the scenario that you're applying it to might not be appropriate first and foremost. So think about that. All right, guys, that is it for this week. Thanks for tuning in, and talk to you guys next time.